We don't have a ton of time, so we're going to give you a high-level overview of the current state and impact of artificial intelligence in telemedicine healthcare today, where it's looking like it's growing in the future. We're going to talk about strategic decision-making drivers for adopting AI in telemedicine. So why do you care about this, and what specific parts of the industry are likely to be affected the most? Ingredients for a successful AI in telemedicine implementation. So what do you need to make this actually work? And then we'll finish off with some brief Q&A, and if there's any rollover, we can deal with them afterwards. So just a kind of a brief note that, you know, in 2026, so that's only 7 years away, we're looking at potential creation of 150 billion, that's billion with a B, in annual savings for just the U.S. healthcare economy. So obviously worldwide, we're going to see, you know, quite a bit of a multiplier on that. So this is a significant opportunity already. And we're also seeing this, that it's not targeted in one specific field inside of healthcare. We're actually seeing quite a bit of spread. Now, some fields have gotten a bit of a head start with robot-assisted surgery and some of the virtual nursing assistants, but we're seeing with healthcare funding in general and equity deals that are being done, they're still on the rise. So this is going to be a very prevalent trend and a very disruptive force moving forward. Telemedicine on the other side is a little bit further ahead, I would say, than the AI world. So with already, you know, booking revenue at almost $20 billion in 2025. So again, reminder, it's 2019, so it's only 6 years away, and that's up from $6 billion in 2016. So you know, we're seeing dramatic rises there, even inside of telemedicine, and obviously putting the two of them together is going to create a lot of very interesting synergies, and we're going to kind of talk about that. And we're already seeing applications in the market today with remote diagnosis for diabetics. So let's talk about some impacts of AI specifically in healthcare services. You're seeing an increase in patient touch points that are going to provide the early warnings to medical professionals through AI monitored Internet of Things wellness devices. So this is your Fitbits and some of the other specialized, you know, applications on phones. And while they're not medical devices per se, they're giving more data touch points both to the artificial intelligence side to pattern match, but also to the medical professionals that are used to seeing patients, you know, once a week, once a month. You're seeing a lot of AI applied for early stage detection of critical diseases. That's where a lot of the early funding is. Critical diseases being, you know, heart disease, cancers, and the like, with the aggressive pattern matching and algorithms that are available to you in artificial intelligence as we're feeding them more data. And then there's kind of a global push towards access to medical records throughout an entire patient's healthcare journey for all parties. And all parties really being not just the medical professionals, not just the patients, the payers and insurance companies, and, you know, clinics versus you know, technology centers and the like. We're also going to see a dramatic decrease in cost due to fraud and malpractice, as a lot of the, you know, the trends and warning signs will come out from AI oversight there, as well as just the sheer time spent by medical professionals on administrative tasks with workflow automation. So as we can, you know, improve the workflow that is happening, we can have medical professionals focusing on, you know, obviously what they do best, and that's really paying attention to patients and you know, diagnosis and treatment. Telemedicine, on the other side, is really about removing geography from the equation. So the number of medical professional touch points to patients, so we don't have doctors that are physically traveling in remote geographies, physically flying. This is especially true for specialists. And ultimately, that's about rising the quality of care in remote geographies. So not everybody, you know, can expect top quality service in kind of city centers. The expectation now is that that should be available to everybody regardless of your geography. And that flexibility for medical professionals to allow them not to have to travel, you know, around the world, around the country, around their state to get to their patients all the time is going to allow them to see more patients, deliver better quality of care, and frankly just have a better quality of life themselves, which will increase their ability to care for their patients. You're going to see a decrease in the sheer cost to bring patients and medical professionals to the same geography. Instead of forcing patients to come to city centers or forcing medical professionals or incentivizing them to work in remote geographies, we can now connect them safely and compliantly with technology. And as a result, because you don't have those travel times and bookings and all the rest of it, wait times are obviously going to decrease, especially true for specialists. As you go further and further up the specialty pyramid, there are less and less of your peers, and you're in seemingly demand all the time. And then we're also seeing there's quite a bit of evidence that there's hospital stay length is actually decreasing with AI-assisted robotic surgery, which is really on the cutting edge of kind of a telemedicine, but also the robotic surgery side, as the accuracy and the pinpoint ability to have an AI assist the surgeons as they're going through, and then the accuracy of the intention of the surgery leads to that shorter hospital stay. Okay, so how does this work? So in general, there's really three approaches to, we call it, training your AI. So an AI is going to start out fairly dumb. You need to feed it a lot of data, and you need to train it on what the right answers are versus the wrong answers. Largely, this is a lot of pattern matching training. There are some differences in that, and it's about it's very much just like teaching a child something. It's about rewarding good behavior and also correcting behavior that isn't desirable. So the three major ways to do this: unsupervised learning, which typically isn't used a whole lot in the healthcare space. It is used outside of that for large disparate reams of data and trying to find generic patterns throughout that. That's more a research type application. Supervised learning, which is definitely something that is used regularly inside of healthcare. We have the results. You have the historical results, but you have the diagnosis as well. So training an AI to assist in either that diagnosis or trend lines for patient quality. We have both the answer as well as the inputs. So that level of supervision will typically create artificial intelligence tools that are more accurate. Semi-supervised learning is useful for procedures and data sets that are still being built. So while you may not have the mountain of data that's required to get to the accuracy you want, the assistance from an AI can still be useful. It needs to be noted, obviously, that accuracy may not be as high, but the semi-supervised learning will say this is a guaranteed data set, and then this real-world, real-time information that's coming through from patients that are undergoing their healthcare journey are still kind of going on. So on the left, you see a diagram. It's actually an interesting application where you can combine the AI tool sets as well. A lot of focus right now for early offerings in the marketplace have been, we'll use this AI tool set like natural language processing to solve the written doctor's note problem. It's the illegible notes and the illegible prescription type problem for that, or just simply digitizing health records in general, considering there's a lot of handwritten notes. There's been a lot of focus on that. There's been a lot of focus on machine learning and the tool sets in there to do aggressive pattern matching across large sets of data. And it's very interesting to start to see the combination between the two of them, where natural language processing is now providing the data that's required to input into the machine learning side of things. So it's increasing the accuracy and the decrease in the amount of time it's required to train those machine learning so that they can assist the medical professionals appropriately. There are some hurdles. There's nothing comes for free, especially in the healthcare space. So the regulatory burden, which is always something of concern in the healthcare space. Frankly, there's a lack of standards for AI systems outside of the bucket that the FDA has created of general wellness products. And while the FDA has provided some guidance there, frankly, it hasn't been explored, very aggressively. There has been, some approvals, but it's largely an unbeaten path. And the assessment for efficacy for the AI systems is also not well explored with respect to clinical trials. So if you're running a clinical trial, you're doing it, with an AI-assisted procedure or process, how the FDA actually assesses that efficacy is largely unknown. So they have provided guidance. There has been, some approvals there, but this isn't like, clinical drug trials where there's a very well-known process, they were going through. The other side of things is about data, and machine learning is in particular is very data hungry. And while companies, providers, and payers have quite a bit of data that's around, that frankly there's not much incentive for actually sharing the data between those healthcare providers, and liability concerns for privacy breaches relating to those data exchanges are a bit on the rise, with GDPR being still a little bit new, and the European Union giving that the enforcers there and compliance officers quite a bit of teeth. So there's a bit of concern there, but as with the emergence of open standards like FHIR, we're starting to see at least the ability to exchange data at a protocol level. So how we're actually going to communicate between two systems, that is, from a technology perspective, becoming a lot easier, and we expect to see the regulatory and liability hurdles go down as the clear need, but also the efficacy of these types of AI systems comes forward in the near future. So there has been some great success stories. I mean, even with some of those regulatory burdens and barriers there, and the challenges surrounding getting enough data to actually push through meaningful and effective results. So I'll go through a few of them here. This, by all means, is not an exhaustive list. We could probably do a webinar just based on some of the cool things that are happening and the really effective things that are happening in the healthcare space with AI and telemedicine. But I'll give kind of 3 shout outs here. So Sensely, which is an application and some devices for digital nursing. It's intended to monitor a patient's condition and follow up with treatment between doctors' visits. So versus a doctor seeing a patient kind of, let's call it post-surgery, once a week, these kind of micro touch points, while they're not medical professional certified, they will give the doctors and the healthcare team indications whether they should bring patients back in early if they're seeing the potential for infection rise, for instance, or other complications, versus waiting the entire week. It's about catching those potentials early, but also the reverse of saying, well, actually the recovery is doing well, we don't need this patient to come in this week, we'll skip this appointment, and allowing the hospital or the insurance company to redeploy those resources where they're most needed. The second one, Atomwise, is they're really kind of trying to poke at drug discovery guided by artificial intelligence. So there's really 2 wings for this. There's creating AI-assisted molecules for drug discovery. So these are new drugs that are being identified from either existing drugs or new combinations, guided by efficacy of drugs that already exist, guided by the AI. But also, what's actually quite interesting is discovering new uses for existing drugs. So this was particularly prevalent during the Ebola outbreak in the past couple of years. Atomwise actually went back through its catalog of existing drugs and identified, I believe it was 3 or 4 drugs that may actually have an impact on Ebola that were previously unknown. And some of those drugs are actually on their way to clinical trial now as a potential for the treatment regime for Ebola. So it's not just about creating kind of those new drugs that are out there in synthetics. It's also about kind of going back through your catalog and remonetizing things that are already there. The Medex DermSecure platform, which is a quite innovative dermatologist telemedicine platform, it's actually a a really interesting offering from Medix, providing this end-to-end telemedicine platform for not just the kind of the dermatologists on one side, but dermatologists, connected or disconnected scanning centers, and all the administration that's required to get all the messages, diagnosis, and imaging all in the right places at the right times, get the proper sign-off so that patients that are remotely disconnected from their dermatologist can get top quality diagnoses. So this is really a fantastic example of this end-to-end user journey throughout a patient's experience in the healthcare system, specifically for dermatologists and skin imaging. Let's talk about some strategic drivers. So if you're the healthcare provider, you're focused on increasing patient quality and efficacy of care. That's always top of mind for any provider. Is this actually effective, and is this actually making my patients healthier? Are we solving the problems that they're here trying to resolve? And they're also, one of the other big drivers here is unlocking the specialist resources from geographical constraints. So hopefully in the next 5-6 years, we're going to see the removal of this need to fly the top cardiologist in the country all over, to see patients. They can remain closer to home, or even do diagnoses from from other places in the country if they're speaking at a conference or the like. It's really disconnecting those pieces where needed, and then obviously prioritizing their physical location where needed. So it's about being efficient. From a healthcare vendor, this is really about an explosion in business and product innovation. We talked about kind of 3 of those before, but those are really 3 in a large pervasive market here. So there's a lot of new offerings that are going to come out. Some of them are going to have AI, some of them are going to have telemedicine. The combination between the 2 of them, and then the maturing of that market is going to result in a greatly expanded marketplace. That's going to be very interesting to watch how that plays out. And from the payer, it's always about cost reduction, right? So cost reduction, overhead reduction, and a response to the complexity and prevalence of fraud in the system, which is always a concern really at the payer level. And this will allow them to be much more intelligent about how that will be indicated versus sending out insurance officers and adjusters and all the like to that frankly are sometimes disruptive to patient care, but necessary for the process of paying for care. Let's talk about some ingredients and how to make this happen. So I've dropped the hint a few times in the webinar so far. If you're going to run artificial intelligence, especially in healthcare, you need a lot of data. So it's about getting all of that data back to kind of a repository where your AI engine can consume it and be trained from a wide variety of sources. So sourcing data and storing digital data, at its heart, is going to require a clinical data repository. So these are secure, compliant repositories for your patient records in a digital format. And you're going to want to make sure that your clinical data repositories, or CDRs, embrace data exchange standards, specifically FHIR. I mean, the HL7 is still kind of out there as well, but FHIR we're seeing definitely emerges as the standard for this type of data exchange. And then we're seeing a lot of this, come back from clinics, hospitals, even payers and insurance companies across geographies, coming back into a compliant cloud. So most of the large cloud providers provide HIPAA and GDPR compliant capabilities. So bringing, centralizing and federating that data in there, and then feeding that into your AI engine, and then pushing back out the results on the other side is going to be a critical ingredient to making sure that you are really unlocking, but also monetizing all of the data that you have throughout, the access to your organization, in order to train your AI to then turn around and provide the gains we talked about before. From the actual AI engine itself, I mean, this is a little bit more detail in what I was discussing before. So we have a lot of source systems. So source systems being the databases of legacy data. So legacy data may actually be in paper form, and that's why we talked a little bit about natural language processing and AI guided OCR, or optical character recognition. So let's get the reams of paper that we've all had to store for 7+ years, digitize them, because now they have value. And especially both sides of the equation, not just the patient symptoms, but also the diagnosis that's coming out and the end result. Pushing all of that through into your CDRs, and then federating that back up into a cloud so it can be consumed by your machine learning engine. The flip side of that is that's your legacy data, but you have an ongoing business as well. So getting the real-time information from that through a platform, similar to some of the telemedicine platforms that we're seeing, where they're all basically digital first. You can get that real-time sourcing back through into your machine learning, and this is where that semi-assisted machine learning algorithms can help you out as the data gets has higher quality being as a diagnosis and the results actually come through. You can train your machine learning appropriately for the next diagnosis that's in there. So those two major sources are going to be critically important. Keeping in mind that you need to store these in compliant storage like CDRs, and have them all federated back to a single place for your machine learning to be trained. So that's typically your compliant cloud. On top of that, you're going to want to consider that you may not have access to all of the data that you need. And healthcare is kind of a special place where there's not a lot of publicly available databases out there that most other artificial intelligence training are actually relying on outside of healthcare. And likely that's going to mean that you're going to need to partner with other companies that do have that data. So there's going to be, there will be some liability and regulatory challenges there. We're expecting to see that cleaned up as kind of GDPR calms down a little bit and some of the other privacy concerns. But those types of partnerships are going to be critical to getting different sets of data into your AI engine and preventing bias from seeping into to your machine learning patterns. So for example, if your data that you're coming in is typically all from US males from 35 to 45, but you want to have a global application, your machine learning pattern is going to be biased towards the potential effectors for US males of 35 to 45. So applying them to women in the same geography is probably going to have some issues here. So finding companies that have data that is European data, that is male and female and other age ranges, will allow you to expand and increase your accuracy for more disparate questions and answers. So here's the big question. You're kind of interested, you know how to put some of this together. Are we ready to make this journey? So there's a lot of crossover in between AI and telemedicine and the kind of the readiness checklist and the things you need to have before putting this together. So we talked about data, for AI. Big data is one of the driving forces for AI in general. That's going to be critically important, as we talked about. You may need to partner to get that, so that's a more complex business arrangement. But also unlocking the data that you have, that means natural language processing and OCR. Once you've got that data, you need to store it in a way that's compliant. Otherwise, you basically just unlocked the key to your basement file storage and let anybody walk in. This is really about your CDR strategy, how that's going to be pushed out to the myriad of different data sources you're trying to pull back in, and how you're going to pull that back in. So that's the data exchange protocol. Again, we're seeing FHIR come through as a quite a modern standard that we think is going to be the go-to standard for that. You're going to see a little bit of HL7 still out there from some legacy operations that have been around. And then once we're all talking together, you want to pull that back into to a central location. And that's going to be your cloud storage provider. So this is typically, things like Amazon Web Services, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform. But it's important to make sure that whatever services you're using from those cloud providers are compliant with the regulatory needs that you have. So if you're going global, that means HIPAA and GDPR, as well as any local regulations. And then the next, the natural language processing we kind of talked about for some of the OCR and unlocking patient records, but also machine learning. There are lots of different options and different algorithms that are inside of those. So we typically refer to those as a toolkit. And there is no one solution that that provides the answer to everything. It's about understanding what your data looks like, understanding what kind of questions you're going to ask, and what kind of answers you expect, and really providing the right toolkits there. And then especially, I'm going to highlight the last one on the telemedicine side, but it does actually apply a bit to AI, and we're seeing this as products mature. Really understanding your user journey through a product roadmap, and understanding not just how patients might use the system, not just how medical professionals, but everybody involved in that healthcare journey, and their different takes on what they want to see and how they want to see it is rather important. So the future is here. It's really about how big the disruption is going to be to your business, and how you're going to embrace this. So to recap, we covered the current state and the explosive impact of AI and telemedicine in healthcare, and the disruption that is already starting to happen and explode. We're seeing, we went over some strategic decision-making drivers of why you care about adopting AI and telemedicine, outside of just the disruptive properties, all of the gains that you can potentially get. And then we talked about some of the large ingredients for successful AI and telemedicine implementation. So what do you need to make this start to happen? What do we need to start gathering as you go through this journey of implementation? And Don, I think we're going to pass it back over to you for some questions and answers I think we're going to have from the participants. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jake. I'm not sure my introduction got communicated for everybody that didn't, or for the lack of audio at that time. My name's Don Hertz. I'm the business development lead at Blank Labs. So thank you, Jake. Lots to consider there. A lot of information to consume.
Yeah.
And let's just get right to our questions.
Sounds good.
All right. So our first question comes from Jennifer in Chicago. Thank you, Jennifer, for attending today. And thank you for your question. Jennifer would like to know, and this is a good question, what's the requirements in an artificial intelligence and telemedicine project?
Right. So data exchange is actually really important, especially as companies are potentially partnering with each other that may have disparate strategies, or just pulling it back from legacy implementations, or or the like. We're seeing FHIR as a pretty big standardized protocol there, and a lot of the modern CDRs like Smile have actually implemented both that and kind of the legacy HL7. So we're really seeing those as the data exchange protocols to strive for.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let's go to our second question. Roger in Alberta. Welcome, Roger. Roger would like to know, when storing clinical data on the cloud and applying machine learning processes, what are the regulatory constraints and how have you dealt with them?
Yeah, so we talked about CDRs, and that's more for kind of exterior to the cloud. You can run a CDR in a cloud if you like, but frankly, a lot of the cloud providers have seen this stuff come through, and they've made strides to make some of their services HIPAA compliant. Now, some of their services is the important part. So if you're at a conference for AWS, for instance, you're going to hear about a lot of like new and shiny tools and processes they're going to provide. HIPAA compliance usually follows that quite a bit afterwards, if appropriate. So it's important to note that when you're building your cloud storage and your machine learning in the cloud, that the services that you're using from that cloud provider are actually HIPAA compliant or GDPR compliant, and compliant to the regulatory needs of the market you're servicing, not necessarily where it's actually physically deployed.
Okay, Good to know. We're really pushing our time here, so let's just take one more question.
Okay.
And this is from Becky in New York. Welcome, Becky. Thank you for your question. Becky would like to know, what tools and software stack would you recommend for a healthcare project using machine learning and natural language processing?
That's a good question, Becky. So the answer is all of them. So here at Blank Labs, I mean, we really, there is no one solution that fits everything. Otherwise, I think we would have productized that and kind of called it a day. Really what we're seeing is that there are a lot of great tool sets that are out there, and it's all about picking the right tool for the right problem set to get the right answers that you need. And sometimes that's guided by the quality and quantity of data you have. Sometimes that's qualified by the type of questions you're going to answer and how directed versus generic they are, and what kind of answers you expect and how accurate you want them to be. If you're looking at generic answers, there's kind of a set of algorithms for that. If you're looking at something that's very specific, again, there's a different set that'll be done there.
Okay. So we apologize to everyone because we cannot get to the other questions. We will be hosting a drop-in or an open mic session, if you like to call it, this Friday, February 8th at 1:30 Eastern Time, where you can engage with one of our subject matter experts regarding your questions. Please send us an email at info@blanklabs.com, and we will send you the call-in details. Also, I'd like to just make a note for those attending the HIMSS conference next week in Orlando. One of our great partners, Simpatico Intelligent Systems, has a booth there, 1721 in the Ontario Pavilion. Please drop by and say hello, and they can talk to you about some of the things we discussed here today. Also, you can send us an email, again, at info@blanklabs.com, and we'd be happy to pre-arrange an intro with the Simpatico team. So that wraps up our session. We really appreciate everybody including us in your day today, our day, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.